welcome. Thank you so much for coming to the launch of the new resource designed to help local authorities assess their modern slavery risk. I don't know how far you've travelled tonight, but it's great to have you all with us. It's lovely to be able to gather again, both in person and online, I guess for the first time in 2 years, for some of us. So it's really good not to take for granted the fact that we can actually have the launch with you here today. My name's Philippa King, and I've been working on a range of social justice issues for the last 15 years, both at the UN, State Department and governments globally. And I'm just really, really thrilled to be part of Shiva Foundation now. So what's coming up this evening, and also why has it come about and who's been involved? Modern slavery in its many forms, human trafficking, forced labour, debt bondage, among others, continues to affect millions of people worldwide. Some estimates put them a number of people enslaved, being exploited, about 49.6 million people, and that includes 27.6 million people in forced labour. And the complexity of business supply chains mean modern slaves are often hidden from companies and organisations, but their presence is estimated to generate approximately $150 million in illegal profits in the private economy every year. So this project was created in light of the government's package of measures planned earlier this year, designed to strengthen the Modern Slavery Act's transparency legislation, including, amongst other things, extending the reporting requirement to public bodies with an income of £36 million or more. What that means is it means publishing statements outlining steps taken to ensure no modern slavery is taking place in either your organisation or in your supply chain. I'd really like to thank our partners Stop the Traffic and the Mekong Club, who have worked on this project together with us. The Mekong Club allowed us to adapt their self-assessment framework specifically for local authorities, and Stop the Traffic has been undertook joint research for the project from the start and did a risk mapping exercise with local authorities to make sure that the scorecard and guide really fitted to local authorities' needs. We couldn't have developed the resource without their wisdom and expertise, and we're so grateful for that. We'd also really like to thank the Home Office for the funding of this project and all the individuals across local authorities across the UK, both in the procurement and also safeguarding teams, who participated in our research interviews and so really helped test the product and the guide and the self-assessment tool. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. We're going to start off this evening with a message from Eve Tilley from the Home Office. She's in the Modern Slavery Unit, and her presentation, which will be played shortly, is going to cover how modern slavery manifests itself in different supply chains. She'll also cover a little bit about the Section 54 in the Modern Slavery Act, and also how the Home Office would like to extend it. And then after Eve's message, we've got Natalie and Vinuhi, both from Responsible Procurement Team at Westminster Council. And they're going to share with us their approach to modern slavery due diligence, both for new and existing contracts, and also a little bit about what their plans are for the next 6 months ahead. And then Dami Amola from Shiva Foundation, our Programme Director. She's led on this project throughout and been responsible for writing the guide alongside Kate and Nishma. And she's going to share with you just a brief overview of the guide and the scorecard itself, and go over a few of the key thematic themes for you. And Jason Nunn, the Director of Business Engagement at Stop the Traffic, he is going to share with you and go into the review of the risk mapping exercise that they did with the local authority, and also a summary of key recommendations that came out of that process, which would be really useful for you to take forward. And finally, Minat Sajdev, she was Foundation's Director and also a councillor, local councillor, is going to share and close this evening's launch, and just share her experiences as a local councillor and why this tool is really valuable and how it can be used. Personally, I really hope this self-assessment scorecard and guide would be a powerful tool to really help people understand the real risk of modern slavery and also take action to tackle it. So now we're going to play Eve Tilley's presentation. Thank you.
Any questions? Shall I get our slides up? Thank you. So thank you very much for having us along. My name is Natalie Evans. I'm the Responsible Procurement Manager at Westminster City Council.
I'm Valerie Trossi and I'm the Responsible Procurement Officer at Westminster City Council.
So we wanted to come along today to share a little bit about the work that we do at Westminster, and also I just wanted to start off by saying a big thank you for having us along. This scorecard, we've reviewed it ourselves and we think it's going to be a really great asset to local authorities across the UK. It has been, as our Home Office colleague has described, a really long slog trying to get the bill through Parliament and to actually put the onus on us to step up and do the same as private sector. But we've decided we're not going to wait for that. We need to get on with it ourselves. We want to try and share our learning with other public bodies, which we're doing through a London Responsible Procurement Network that we've set up. But also we want to work with colleagues in, for example, Anti-Slavery International, Mekong and Shiva Foundation. We really appreciate being here today. So we want to kick off by just describing, if we swap places a sec. So I want to just briefly describe what we do in terms of the difference between new contracts and existing contracts. So just by way of brief background, we've established a new responsible procurement and commissioning strategy at Westminster. This is going to be launched in the new year. It's hopefully getting endorsed, fingers crossed, in December this year. With that is coming our modern slavery statement that we're going to publish. It's the first one that's going to be published by Westminster City Council, and a host of other kind of implementation tools that I'll take you through. But so in terms of new contracts, what we do at the beginning is a kind of sector-based risk assessment. This is something we've already undertaken, and we've already allocated high-risk categories that were going to be our main areas of focus. Obviously, like most public sector authorities, we buy a lot of stuff over a very broad range of categories, so we really have to focus our efforts on those that are the highest risks. We then look at integrating modern slavery and exploitation due diligence requirements in the actual specifications of our tenders. So we're not looking at giving people points for being diligent. We're looking at actually setting very concrete milestones within the specification or scopes of works of our contracts. For example, setting a specific timeline for when they have to produce a supply chain map for certain high-risk products. So that goes in the specifications. And when I'm talking high-risk contracts in the public sector, I mean construction, as we heard from the Home Office, PPE, textiles, electronics, manufactured goods and food. So we then go for supplier selection. That means that we have a supplier charter. This charter is then embedded into our actual selection criteria. So if suppliers don't agree with the requirements in our charter in terms of what they have to fulfill, one example being the completion of the modern slavery assessment tool and a link to how they're progressing along that, then we simply don't do business with them. They don't progress through to tender. That's quite a robust requirement. Obviously, that only kicks in with tenders of quite a high value because we don't want to be creating artificial barriers for very small companies. We then go along and look at their modern slavery statements. Valerie's going to tell you a little bit about that in a second, how we actually assess their modern slavery statements. Then it's supplier engagement. As soon as they mobilise, we don't give them a chance to bed in and get complacent. We have kick-off meetings with the responsible person within that organisation that looks at modern slavery, whether or not they be in their risk team, their HR team, and run through the things that we've already put into the contract, what they're going to be delivering, when, if they need any kind of guidance, how. In other organisations I've worked at, we've actually buddied up very sort of high-performing contractors with those that have never even heard of a supply chain map and got them to exchange information on it. So when I worked for the City of London Corporation, we got marshals, who are a stone quarrying company, who are doing very well, to actually teach our IT managed service contractor how to do a supply chain map, which was fantastic. It worked really well. Then we look at a detailed contract-specific risk assessment in collaboration with that supplier. We're not just passing all of this responsibility onto them. We want to do this in sort of hand in hand and support them. The onus is on them to undertake this risk assessment, but we can give them a good idea of the high risk products that we want looked at. They develop an action plan. We mutually agree those targets and timelines, and then we monitor and support. That's the easy bit with new contracts, is we've actually got some leverage. So I'll tell you what we do with existing contracts. Again, high-level risk assessments across our existing supply chain. So we look at those that we've already got in practice, who the high spend, who do we have any leverage with, who are the high-risk contractors. We then do the modern slavery statement assessments. It's similar kind of aspects, but we have to do it in a different order because of the leverage we have. But it's useful for initiating conversations with them. We then engage with the suppliers that are the highest risk, obviously prioritising those as well. Ask them to undertake the voluntary commitments to the supplier charter. We want to try and do this in January next year by having a swanky launch event, getting our leadership there with their quills to sign the modern slavery statement, but also to get our suppliers there, our really strategic suppliers, to actually sign the charter in front of their peers, to give them a little bit of kudos. It's good for their kind of chances of winning tenders with other organisations as well, and a bit of charm training. In terms of detailed contract-specific risk assessments, this is going to have to be with those that volunteer to do so. Again, action plan developed and monitoring and support with their continuous improvement. But was just going to take you through how we assess modern slavery statements.
So as Natalie already mentioned, we undertake an assessment of our modern slavery statements of our high-risk suppliers. For this, we have 6 categories: organizational structure, risk assessment and management, due diligence, policies, effectiveness, and training. And these categories are measured against 40 different measures, allowing us to get a really holistic assessment of our suppliers' products, their services and customers, its relevant policies, including whistleblowing, code of conduct, HRs, ILO labour standards and expectations with other suppliers, their corrective action plans, as well as modern slavery risk assessments and training. And each measure is given a point from 0 to 1, and hence the colour scheme, as you can see. Whilst this is not used in our evaluation stage of our tender process, it forms a key part of our supplier relationship management once the tenderer is actually appointed. It's part of our first step of initiating conversation with the supplier and identifying any potential gaps before we start the actual contract-specific detailed risk assessments. Once again, on the screen, you can see the differences between the different suppliers, and this visualization really allows us to identify the clear gaps.
Okay, I'm not going to go through this in detail. We've only got a very short amount of time, but it's just to give you a flavour of what we're going to be doing over the next 6 months. So the actions that I ran through with you at the beginning on new and existing contractors, we're basically measuring this using different, scores such as the percentage of modern slavery statements we've actually assessed. This is more of an internal reflection of how we're doing. Super complicated, and it's going to be way easier to use the new modern slavery assessment tool that Dami and her colleagues have come up with. I know that she spent a lot of time on that. I got grilled myself during the development of that, but it's going to be really good to be able to see where our own gaps are. I think I'm predicting that we're going to be on the cusp of between advanced and leadership, I think, but I'm going to undertake the assessment ASAP and identify where we can really improve. But yeah, that's all we had to say, other than a really quick shout out for the London Responsible Procurement Network. We're working with Ministry of Justice, all the London boroughs, NHS, universities, etc. We've just formed a Just Transition working group. So we're specifically looking at clean tech, those areas that we're really focusing in on at the moment, like solar panels, heat pumps, etc., and looking at how we can collaborate on making sure that we are not exacerbating one issue whilst trying to solve climate change. But if anybody's up for having any conversations, collaborating, etc., please do get into contact with us. Handing over to Dami now from Shiva.
Hi everyone, so my name is Dami. I am the Senior Program Manager at Shiva Foundation, and I was actively involved in the creation of the toolkit. So super happy to finally be able to launch it after 10 long months. Can I just ask my colleagues to please hand out physical versions of the guide so that everyone can actually follow along as I'm speaking? So that'll be really good. For those online, you should have all received a link to the full guidance, which you can view the e-version as I walk through the scorecard. As Philippa mentioned, I'll be running through the resource, showing how the points work, as well as the main elements of the scorecard. So I'll run through all of those main elements. Hopefully, it won't be too much information. Sit back, have a sandwich, have a drink, and yeah, hopefully this should be good. So before I get started, just to reiterate, the scorecard and guidance has two elements. So there is both an online scorecard and questionnaire, as well as the physical guidance that you see in your hand. And it's really important that both the guidance and the online scorecard are used together, and you'll understand why that is as I move throughout this presentation. So first, the overview of the scorecard. So a few points. It's an online questionnaire, so I'll share the link with all of you. Those in the room, you can actually scan the back of the scorecard and the summary. You should see a QR code there, so you should be able to access the actual online scorecard. There are 12 main questions that make up the online scorecard, which have a set amount of questions, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. There are 36 sub-questions. Don't be scared, you won't have to answer all of them. So likely a lot less than that. And the scorecard is out of a total of 400 points. So I'll talk through how those points are made up. And at the end of the scorecard, you'll receive a final score along with a specific category of which your organization falls into. Cool, so please scan the scorecard now. So it's at the back of the guides, use your phones, that would be great. If you can't scan it, there's a unique link on the screen, and for those online, you would have also received that link. And it'll be really great if you could follow the scorecard with me as I walk through it. So before you actually start on the scorecard, there are a few things that I'd like to present. Firstly, the questions that make up the scorecard touch many different departments, and that was an intentional move. We wholeheartedly believe in the power of internal collaboration. And so we recommend creating a cross-departmental team as you work through the scorecard. So get everyone who would possibly have the answers to these questions around the table so you can work together to come up with a solution. In order to do that, we recommend you be prepared. In the annex, you will see a full list of questions and all the departments that it touches on. So invite those people around the table and work together to create that, to complete the scorecard. And lastly, the information you submit via the scorecard will be held confidentially by the partners on this project in line with GDPR regulations. So that's really important. All right, so the main questions. There are 12 main questions, so every organization will have to complete the 12 main questions, and there are a set amount of points for those questions. So if your organization answers yes to that question, you'll receive 20 points, mostly 10 points, partially 5 points, no, don't know, 0 points. All the questions in the scorecard are multiple choice, so you won't be required to put in any numerical or written answers, so that is hopefully would reduce some stress. And you might ask why or how would we know whether our organization is working at a kind of mostly or partially level? The scorecard guidance will help you pick that answer, and when I get to that section, we'll talk through that too. So there are 36 sub-questions. Like I mentioned, you won't have to answer all of those questions, so it's likely that you answer a lot less. The total amount of questions that you eventually answer depends on the answer to the main questions that your organization submits. But a list of all the questions are in the annex, so you are able to kind of plan before you actually do the scorecard. Say you finished all of the questions, you finished all of the main questions, all of the sub-questions. What happens next? You will be given a final classification or a final score, and it fits into 3 brackets. The first bracket is the developing bracket. So that means your organization scored between 0 and 175 points. The advancing stage means that your organization scored between 176 and 300 points. And the leading stage means your organization fell between 301 and 400 points. And after many tests, we're pretty sure that these kind of classifications are accurate. I did want to say that there is no limit on the amount of times you can take this scorecard. In fact, we want you to take it as many times as possible so that you can review your answers and continuously improve as you go along. So that's the scorecard. The second part of the resource is the guidance. And like I said, the guidance, we want you to read it alongside you filling out the scorecard. It's really long, so it's about 80 pages, but it's not designed to be read cover to cover. It's designed for you to dip into the scorecard, to dip into the guidance and dip out, and to kind of use it as and when you need it. There are 3 sections in the guide, and I'll talk through what each of those sections cover. I'll also talk about the 8 key themes that are outlined in the guidance as well as the overall scores that you will receive at the end as well. So like I mentioned, there are 3 sections. The first section talks about how to actually use the guide. It talks about the background to the project. It talks about the motivations for the project and why it was important for us to do it. The second section is the main body of the actual guide. It covers all 8 themes, and I'll talk about what those are and the main aspects of all of these themes as well. The final section is the annex, and that covers both the risk mapping exercise that STD completed, and we're going to hear about really shortly, but also has all the list of questions, like I said, that you can use to prepare and get yourself ready before you actually complete the scorecard. I understand it's also very long, so on your seats you should see a short summary, and if you open the summary, it gives you an overview of all of the main things that are outlined in the guide, and the people online as well, you should receive a unique link to that too. Okay, so I just want to quickly talk about the main themes and how to actually read the guide itself. So there are 8 themes that I will introduce a bit later. For each theme, you would have a few introductory paragraphs introducing you to the topic, followed by 3 specific tables. So you'd have a developing, advancing, and leading table. And it provides you kind of guidance around what specific thresholds you need to meet in order to be able to satisfy that specific amount of points. So it's quite detailed. And so if you read the scorecard alongside answering, or read the guide alongside answering the scorecard, you should be able to know what answer to pick for your organization. So it's quite detailed. And each table increases in terms of the threshold that you need to meet in order to be able to meet that number of points. I think the real gem with this guidance is the plethora of resources. So we link to a whole load of resources, and we separate them down by theme. So you're able to access all the templates, all of the guidance, all of the advice, all in one place. So I'm pretty excited about that, and we hope that we can continually add to them as well. Really briefly, I would like to touch on the 8 themes that we introduced and what they how we break them down. So the first is modern slavery statement and policies. So in that section of the guide, we provide an overview of what should be included in your statements, then how to implement specific policies surrounding modern slavery, and the importance of senior level buy-in. We have internal awareness training. We talk about the importance of access, so having training within the organization, what should be included in training, and the importance of tailoring training for both operational but also frontline roles. We have a modern slavery lead section, and I can see a few modern slavery leads in the room, so that's nice. We talk about the importance of having somebody within the organization that's a lead or a team, but also everyone else within the organization knowing who that person is, as well as building that person's knowledge and expertise as well. Risk assessments, we talk about types and tiers of suppliers, targeting higher risk suppliers, which we're going to hear a lot about in the next section. How frequently you should complete your risk assessments, as well as managing your suppliers' data, and why you should do that efficiently. Procurement of protocols and procurement protocols and supplier engagement. We talk about the process for engaging suppliers and why that's important. Embedding those commitment within contracts, and we heard how Westminster is already doing that, which is really exciting. Supporting suppliers with access to knowledge as well. Audit protocols, we talk about the different types of audits that you can conduct and why it's important to include the audit results in other processes such as risk assessments or within embedding those learnings within the contract clauses with your suppliers. Last two areas, so reporting and remediation. We talk about having a robust reporting process for both your employees but also subcontracted labor. Record keeping, just in case any incidents do arise, and keeping accurate records. The remediation process and why that should be victim-centric and centered around the well-being of the victim, and working with others within the organization to support the victim throughout that process. And then the last section is a wider modern slavery collaboration, so the importance of joining other organizations, other forums, other partnerships, and plugging into those networks, as well as embedding a joint approach to tackling modern slavery within the organization itself. And like I mentioned, so at the end of the scorecard, you will receive a overall kind of score, which you can kind of pick where exactly you might fall in to one of these brackets, and then the guidance gives you further knowledge around what that looks like and how you can improve it and move up the scale as well. Yeah, that's it. I hope that was it. Do you have any questions? I'm also around afterwards, so I can answer any questions. No? If not, I would like to introduce Jason Nunn. They did some amazing risk mapping, which kind of, it fed into the success of this project. So I'd like to hand over to him now.
Hello, everyone. So what I'd like to do is just briefly take you through how we conducted the risk mapping for this project and what some of the key findings were, and give some guidance on how you can maybe address some of the risks that we highlighted. Just a couple of moments on who we are, because I'm sure people don't really know. Stop TRAFFIK's been around for 17 years now, and we're really focused on prevention of modern slavery. There's many modern slavery charities out there. Our unique thing is prevention. And I won't go through all of the slide. Suffice to say that our risk mapping is informed by all the work we do. So we run prevention campaigns using social media, and so far we've reached over 20 million vulnerable people around the world. And just to give you some examples of some recent campaigns we've run that are relevant, we ran a campaign targeting displaced Ukrainians over the last couple of years. And is it a couple of years? Maybe a year. Seems like 2 years, doesn't it? And we reached 4.5 million Ukrainians, and they tell us their stories, and that informs us in terms of our risk assessments and how we can actually design interventions to support them and safeguard them. We also ran one, maybe just for local authorities, for instance, we ran one last year targeting county lines, and we connected with over 600,000 families and young people, and again, heard their stories and learned from them. And importantly, educated and raised awareness to help prevent young people getting caught in county lines. And another one that comes up and we're all kind of thinking about today, we ran a campaign targeting Latin American cleaners in and around London, again a high risk group, and we connected with over 300,000 cleaners around London, and we spoke with over 100 in focus groups to understand their experiences. So that goes into our risk mapping. And on the other side, we've risk mapped now for over 200 companies, which really translates into about 100,000 suppliers. And I kind of did some rough maths, especially that you just mentioned earlier about product categories, about 500,000 product categories. So a pretty thorough, and Ewan will tell you, very time consuming process. Just moving on then, in terms of our actual methodology, we've developed this over many years. It uses kind of what a lot of people would use at the top. So 23 different open source data sets covering things like poverty indices, access to bank accounts, gender disparity, things like that are risk drivers for modern slavery. And then also different reports that focus on sectors, high-risk sectors. So we're looking at high-risk countries and high-risk sectors and combining the two together. The kind of extra bit we add on is the collection of those stories. And we do that using our TRAFFIK analysis hub. It's the biggest database of modern slavery incidents in the world. We have over 1 million cases of modern slavery in the database, and we use AI to look at hotspots and routes and look at typologies of how modern slavery is happening for different sectors. And we add that in to get our score for a sector or a country. And of course, those change as the modalities of trafficking change. Now, in terms of this project, and I'll just try and make it slightly interesting by giving you some stats, but no surprise from what you've heard this morning, or this evening, sorry, the highest risk sectors that actually came up were construction, facilities management, and kind of interestingly, although it doesn't necessarily score as high as the other two, we felt that the care sector, or the provision of care services, was also worth looking at because of its particular risk factors. Now, in doing this analysis, we worked with two local authorities, one in London, so if you like a metropolitan local authority, and one in a regional situation, just to see if there was any differences. And we risk mapped over 4,000 suppliers. So in total, the two local authorities had about 4,000 suppliers. 1.2 billion pounds of spend, so pretty big expenditure. What we found was about 50% of the expenditure was low risk. So it's things like paying for electricity, professional services, IT services, things like that. About 10 to 20% was high risk. So these are high risk sectors, for instance, construction. And that kind of translated into about 50 suppliers in total across the two local authorities. So the great thing about this, and the reason we do risk mapping, is to really focus in your resources as you're doing in Westminster. So kind of the 20% that gives you the 80% of the impact. And as you can see, it's very difficult to manage 4,000 suppliers, but it's achievable to look at 50 suppliers in detail and really apply your efforts there. Now, in terms of construction, as I said, that was a big spend, and as you'll all know that. This includes construction of buildings, etc., but also road maintenance and things like that. It's about 65 to 75% of the high-risk spend was in that sector. And of course, within that, you think of the low-skilled temporary labour that's used in construction, which makes it high risk. But London in particular, above all the other regions in the UK, when we've looked at it, is particularly vulnerable because of migrant labour and the exploitation of that labour. I suppose subsectors within it, I'm a civil engineer, so I kind of like construction, is cleaning. It's at the end of the process and they have a clean up on a construction site. No one's around, it's often done at night, so they don't get in the way. So it's a very high risk sector. Things like roofing as well, and groundworks, that's digging trenches and putting in drainage, all those kind of activities. In terms of facilities management, so this is once your building's up and running, about 15% of the spend was on facilities management related activities. Again, things like cleaning. I mentioned the Latin American cleaning project earlier, but also landscaping and security. Security is a very high risk sector. And lastly, on care, about 20% of the spend is related to the care sector, whether it's running facilities for the elderly or people with mental health issues, or care for young people, for instance. When I was sat down there, I thought someone in the room was pressing the button to make the slides go forward, and now I realise I've got to do it, and it's it's just that one little extra thing. So we thought we'd just take a quick look at the care sector in particular, because like I said, it had some interesting kind of aspects to it. one of the things is over recent years, this kind of sector has migrated from something that was kind of almost entirely local authority responsible, had local authorities had total responsibility for it, to actually lots and lots of small private providers who quite often are under the 36 million threshold we were talking about. So that makes it kind of structurally higher risk. It's non-unionized and quite often uses informal recruitment as well. So I'd say on the plus side, because of the safeguarding and there is oversight and checks and audits, that kind of reduces the risk. But because of this kind of fragmented nature and as I say, informal recruitment in many areas, it becomes higher risk. Of course, in this current climate, there's also massive staff shortages, and we have migration, and I mentioned Ukrainian migration earlier, and that's kind of feeding into this high-risk sector. And of course, the whole sector has low wages, high staff turnover, and quite often 0 hours contracts. So you can see you've got all the ingredients of a really high-risk situation. Looking at all this, we've been looking at this from a supplier perspective, but just looking at it also from a client perspective, you've also got a prevalence of vulnerable people. So you have young people, disabled people, mental health issues potentially, but also people in crisis. And so they're also users of those services that could be very high risk. And again, I mentioned county lines earlier, and you'll have all seen stories of young people getting recruited out of situations where they may be in care or being overseen by local authorities. So recommendations. I think we've already heard these. We should just do what Westminster has suggested and follow the scorecard, right? Improving due diligence processes. And I think we've talked about this already. One of the challenges, of course, many organisations find is updated procurement contracts isn't straightforward. You mentioned that. You can do it with your new contracts, but you have to wait for the others to roll over as you try to introduce these new clauses. Using self-assessment questionnaires, SAQs, and third-party audits. But we do think this isn't a situation where you can audit your way out of it. You know, it doesn't create the change we want, and it becomes very, very expensive, right? So what we want is culture change. So we need to work and collaborate with those suppliers, as you were mentioning, get them around the table and help them improve, build capacity, and change the culture of the supply chain. In order to do that, offering training and engagement. So that's not just an internal thing, but actually do it collaboratively across different organizations and also with your suppliers. And I suppose because we're kind of procurement focused, I couldn't not mention consolidation of spending. So you called it leverage. You know, actually, how can you rationalize your supply chain, consolidate the expenditure to get more, if you like, get more attention from the suppliers? But also manage your risk. One of the biggest issues we find is, you know, in this risk mapping process, it's very easy, as I mentioned earlier, to focus on the 20% of suppliers that give you 80% of the risk, and you're ranking them by spend, and you forget about the 10,000 suppliers that you're only spending £1,000 a year with. So how do you manage those? And the way you can do that is by consolidating your spending. So try to avoid that ad hoc, informal procurement that might be going on with lots and lots of different entities, and actually bring that together and manage it more centrally. And again, you can consolidate the expenditure, but you can also manage the risk more effectively. There we go. I tried to go quickly. So I presume you haven't any questions. I don't want to break with the flow, but if there are any questions, please. Oh, there we go.
It was just a really quick one. Your Stop the Traffic Club,
Yeah.
Is that publicly accessible, or do we
It's,
the information you've got about models?
well, it's accessible to all. If you are, I'm kind of dodging the question because I haven't really got the answer. But what I would say is NGOs, it's free, and businesses will pay. I don't know about public sector
Jason.
in the middle.
It's for local authorities, it's free.
Well, there you go. Well done, Fiona. Thank you very much. There we go. Because our thing is, as I said at the very beginning, it's about driving collaboration and sharing data. Because unless we all share and get the big picture, we're not going to tackle this problem. And it's like your collaboration across the London boroughs. Unless we actually work together, we can't do this. So I'm glad to say it's free for local authorities.
If anyone would like a demo, we provide those as well. So please come to
We've just completed, in fact, Fina looks after kind of cross London activities, and she's just done this fantastic analysis of all of the modern slavery incidents across London and what they look like, where they happen. It's really great.
Yeah, well, we'll talk after the event about it. Thanks, Jason.
Hello, Josh Wiegler, Welsh Government. I'm not at all a procurement expert, so the answer to this may well be very obvious, but from a Welsh Government perspective, one of the things we're trying to do outside of non-slavery is trying to do more to look at what we can do to support small and medium enterprises.
Yes.
And I'm just kind of wondering what you were saying in that final slide about consolidating spend, and the bits of that aspiration also about supporting smaller and medium enterprises over larger procurement contracts.
Yeah, I get your point, and that's why I would say engage and raise capacity. I've been involved in a number of situations where very small firms, in fact, where we had two non-compliant firms, and I would say one was non-compliant and they knew it, and the other was they just didn't realise what they needed to do. So one was kind of exited, and the other was supported and helped. And as you say, they improved the quality, and they actually ended up getting bigger contracts and more work. So I would still encourage that, but I suppose the bit what I would try to counsel against is that informal contracting. We're just like local facilities speaking to the man down the pub and getting their windows cleaned or something like that, right? It's that informality. I'm not saying don't go necessarily for the smaller firms, but make sure it's not an informal process. I would just promote something else that we did collaboratively with Charlotte. She was at Shiva. We created our last project, which was an SME handbook, which is guidance specifically for SMEs to help them learn and get educated as well. So it's on the Shiva webpage. You can download it along with this.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much. I'll just hand over to Manal now, who's going to wrap up, I think. Is that?
First slides from me. I'll wrap up. I think that's been a really, really interesting session, and it's been great listening to all of you and going to the granular levels of the scorecards. I want to just start with a few thank yous and personal thank yous, and all of you, thank you all for coming as well, and those who've joined online today. So this obviously couldn't have happened without the funding from the Home Office and Stop the Traffic. So thank you, Jason, and your team, and the Mekong Club as well. I think the few thank yous I want to go through are Sean. I remember being on holiday early this year and getting a phone call saying you received this funding from the Home Office. It was a good day. It was a good moment. Davi, who's literally hit the ground running for the last 10 months and worked tirelessly on this project. Gabriella, Nishma, and Kate, who used to be a part of the team without whom a lot of our local government work would not have happened without her. And she also inputted in this project. Philippa, thank you for the last month putting this together in Aya. And also Shiva Hotels for helping us today and the venue. So thank you to their staff as well. Nishma and I, when we started Shiva Foundation, she was there from day. I was just telling somebody today that she was there from day one. Nishma, one of the things we said at the beginning was that we want to make this issue go from sort of being acceptable to being completely unacceptable, and that's a journey, and that's a lot of awareness and education and legislation. And I think today coming here today, like we are celebrating a big milestone in that journey. And by no means are we there yet. Redwood know that we're not there yet, but we've all done a lot of work in this room. I think we've all made a lot of effort in the right direction by working together, by committing ourselves when we haven't had to commit ourselves. And I like what you said about the fact that, you know, let's not wait until it becomes mandatory. Let's just get on with it. So I think that it's been really good working with people who are just so passionate about this and doing it because they want to do it. I'm a local councillor, and I understand their sort of competing priorities, the lack of resources. It's really hard work, and it was really hard work navigating this when I became a local councillor 8 years ago, when actually pre-Modern Slavery Act, you know, people would almost laugh at you when you mentioned the word slavery and say, well, that doesn't happen here. I remember in my first interview, I had about 8 slightly elderly guys interviewing me, and they said, well, what are you passionate about apart from the residents bit, which I wasn't that passionate about? And I said, well, you know, I want to think about slavery. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, no, there are issues locally, and I think we should be looking at these things. And they all laughed at me, and they said, absolutely, that's not happening in our area. It might be happening in other countries. And I just thought, okay, well, that's it. I can kiss goodbye to becoming a local councillor. Clearly, they were really desperate. So anyway, the fact is that we have had some statistics and data and numbers today. This is real. This is not going anywhere. As Eve said earlier, it is getting worse. It's probably going to get a lot worse. And we all, as individuals, as communities, as parents, as families, as schools, as local authorities, have to be ready. And I think that while we are always welcome to potential extensions of the Modern Slavery Act, hopefully this tool and some of the other tools we've been working on over the last 10 years collectively and individually will make things a lot easier for people who want to make a difference, both local authorities and business. So over the last 6 or 7 years, we have been supporting a lot of anti-slavery efforts at a local level, because ultimately it's at a local level, it's the statutory agencies who are going to be coming across these situations first and foremost. They have to be equipped, they have to be trained. It has to happen now. So in the same vein, the 2 other projects that we're working on are, one is licensing. So we've been working with local authorities around the country to build existing licensing frameworks to increase the sort of modern slavery focus and also engagement with local business. And we'll be reporting, we'll be publishing a report on this as well shortly, like early part of next year. And the second piece, which is very exciting, is a policy advocacy project focused on multi-agency responses to victim support. So one of our biggest learnings on both sides, business and local authorities, is the sort of opportunity to develop collaborative working between agencies. There is no other way of doing it. And so we're specifically interested in how increased collaboration can actually be used to improve the support available for adult victims of modern slavery who may fall outside of the NRM. But obviously happy to discuss, feel free to discuss this with anyone in the team afterwards. So to wrap up then, I think a lot of good work has been happening. Both, you know, we've got 2 hats on, as you mentioned. We worked with Stop the Traffic years ago on the blueprint and the SME toolkit, I think. Yeah. Right, so we've actually done 3 of our big projects with you and local authority now. So we have been partners for a long time, and both on the business as well as local authority side, we can see a lot of progress is being made. Even on the hotel side, like our blueprint has now gone across to nearly 100 hotels, and organizations are really trying to implement policies. They're trying to identify sort of actual and potential impacts. They are trying to engage with suppliers, addressing their supply chains, but of course a lot more needs to be done. And something that we're really, really passionate about, and a few of you've mentioned this today, is actually making sure that whether we're working at the government level, whether we're working in businesses, large organizations, small SMEs, ultimately a lot of the policies have to be victim-led. The voices have to be around the table. We cannot be making legislation here and not making sure that the voices are not being heard. It just doesn't work. I mean, over COVID, something we were involved with was providing emergency hotel accommodation to survivors of modern slavery as well as domestic abuse. And mapping some of these journeys with the victims themselves made you realize that actually what you think are robust mechanisms are actually failing people on the ground sometimes. And understanding where those gaps are so important, and that's where the victim's voice becomes so critical. So anyway, we really hope that these resources are going to be amplified, used across councils, across the country. And let's definitely keep talking. We've got the Stop the Traffic team here today and Shiva Foundation team, and I think it'll be great to see how we can all work together to carry this work forward. Thank you.